ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hello and welcome to the Musicality Podcast. I'm joined today by three members of the Musical U team: Stuart Hilton, our community conductor, Adam Liette, our communications manager, and Andrew Bishko, our product manager and content editor. We're here to talk about moving past negative musical moments in our past and doing so to reach our musical goals. This is a topic that we on the team grapple with fairly often in our work at Musical U, because when people come to Musical U, they generally come with a fairly long musical backstory, whether that is feeling like you're not a musician for most of your life and then finally taking the plunge in retirement, or playing music every day of your life but never really feeling like you've quite cracked it. Our members come from a wide range of backgrounds, but what they all have in common is that there is some part of them that doesn't feel 100% awesome about their musical identity. And of course, we step into the picture to try and fill in some of those concrete skills that can let you feel like a confident natural, let you express yourself, and let you really enjoy every aspect of your musical life. So of course, we end up talking a lot with members about some of the past experiences they've had, things that may have happened to give them the idea that they're not musical. And this comes in a range of guises, from family situations to early music education or indeed lack of it, to gigging with bands and having a negative atmosphere. All kinds of places this can show up in your musical life. And I'm sure that as I've been talking now, you've had moments pop into your own head of sticking points or painful experiences, or those bits of your musical backstory that you're maybe not so delighted with, or that you feel, if you could just put that one to rest, maybe you could move forwards. So I'm really excited to have this chance to talk with Stuart, Adam, and Andrew about their thoughts on this topic and what we can maybe do to acknowledge those negative moments and then move past them. So let's kick things off with Stuart. Stuart, say a quick hello and then tell us, what do you think about this topic of moving past negative musical experiences?
Hi, I'm Stuart Hilton, and I am the community conductor inside the site. You may all know me as my other personality, GTR STU777. That is what you see me in there. And also outside, I play guitar in a few different groups. So that keeps me busy. This topic is pretty dear to me, as I've gone through a lot of things in my own life, stemming all the way back from even being in band and schools in 5th and 6th grade, and things that happened with teachers of all people. But that can happen, and I'm sure there are probably many people that have had similar experiences where sometimes the ones that we're looking to, our mentors, can turn into be our biggest negative input. Which is, since I teach, and I know others on here teach too, I think that's something we all love teaching for, is because we want to be that other side of the coin, and to encourage and be the positive thing in people, to bring you into your own musicality, which is a great thing. And we love seeing everybody on the site doing that. One is, as I was thinking, we have no control over things that are said to us, actions that affect us. However, we are able to find ways and how to handle them to help us move forward and not let them disable us from our dreams. And we'll get to all that, as I'm sure we all will. Also, there's things that we do, I think, in our own lives, and I heard someone discuss it as ledger living. And what that means is like a ledger book where you keep all your finances. In our head, we tend to keep certain instances of our past in our heads, and it kind of directs our life. So, finding ways to fix that or be inspired by that is a good thing. Some other things I found online, a study shows it takes 12 positive reviews. If you have a business, and we all see the reviews online for different things, for one negative review, it takes 12 positive reviews to negate those 12 negative ones. The one negative one, it takes 12 positive ones. That makes a lot better sense. Also, Harvard Business Report I was reading did a study, found the best performing teams or folks needed almost on average 5 positive remarks to offset a negative comment. This also includes sarcastic comments or disparaging comments. So it just shows how that negativity affects us, and then how we have to figure ways out to move past that.
Yeah, and that's a really critical thing, isn't it? No pun intended, but that feedback, there's all kinds of negative musical experiences you might have, but hearing someone say something rude or critical or negative about your music making can cut you straight to the heart, can't it? And 100% agree with those studies in the sense that, we all intellectually might think that one positive comment balances out a negative one. But I think all of us as human beings have found that is not the case. If you perform in public and one person comes up to you afterwards and points out a mistake you made, and then 10 come up and say how great it was, you're going to be thinking about that one negative one when you go to bed. And that can be really tough. I think particularly for young musicians, Stuart, you were talking about your teaching there, and I know you've taught some youngsters as well as adults. And when it's so much a part of the identity you're trying to build up and the ego development, it can be, brutal to hear that one negative comment. And I'd love to hear from Andrew about some of these things. How has this come up in your own musical life, whether through feedback or other experiences?
Well, as Stu was speaking, I was thinking about one of the most cutting remarks that was made to be about my music. Really turned me around, because I deserved it. And I realized that I deserved it. This is when I was at the Conservatory. And basically, while I had classical training growing up for a great part of my musical life at that point, I had been improvising and creating things myself. And I hadn't really been relying on a whole bunch of training. And I learned some tricks. I learned some things that, I was very, very comfortable with. It was really my comfort zone to play in certain keys, in certain things. But I wasn't able to play in all keys. I wasn't really hearing a lot of the music that I was playing. I hadn't really developed my ears to a certain point. And I remember my mentor there at the New England Conservatory saying this, it was like, basically, I don't remember exactly the words, but he's like saying, you've got to do this basic stuff. And I realized I had just been faking a whole bunch of stuff. And I was kind of egoic about, I could do this because I'd been performing with a band. I had, I was dancing on stage and doing all this stuff, but I won't tell you what I was wearing. It was, but I did have these really cool platform shoes, these green platform shoes that I would wear with these yellow pants, And it's like, but it wasn't about the platform shoes and the yellow pants. It was about the music. And there was a place where there was things for me to learn. And I buckled down and, and I was like, wow, I got into the Conservatory. I somehow did this, but, that didn't ensure that I was really the real deal. And I made a lot of changes in my music. I got a lot more disciplined. I got a lot more humble, and I really buckled down and did the work. So in that case, because I was mentally prepared for it, it wasn't like I was a youngster. I was almost 30 years old, and I was ready for that. That was a very good experience. Another experience that built a lot of strength in me was when I in the 80s, I was living in Italy, and this is how I got back into music. I got back in as a street musician, and I was playing flute in the street and had bells on my feet. I danced around, and but that was my source of support. And I met this girl, and we were traveling together, and we were sleeping on this beautiful beach, and in the night, some hooligans came and they cut our sleeping bags where we had our valuables, and they took my flute. And, it was pretty devastating because that was like my lifeline at the time. But I went and I bought a plastic flute, a little plastic fife for a few bucks. And that's what I played on until I'd saved up enough to buy a real one. And I realized then, and then of course, broke up with the girlfriend. That made it doubly worse. And it gets, I don't want to go down there. Anyway, but here I am, I'm here with this plastic flute. And I remember where I was in Sorrento, where they were having this big classical music festival. And there was all these classical players walking around with their nice flutes. And here I am, on the corner with this little piece of plastic. And I remember asking this one girl, can I just play your flute? Just like, really, I'd love to play a flute again. And she was like, no, don't touch that. Anyway, so I'm playing this plastic flute, and I did it, and I realized it wasn't the instrument. It was me that was making the music. I was the one who was making it, and I had a lot of fun with that little thing, and I made a lot of music, and I made enough money to buy myself another flute. So that built a lot of strength in me to overcome various setbacks, a lot of instrumental setbacks that I had afterwards.
Gotcha. Well, I think you're the master of coming up with podcast episode titles. I think this one's going to be, it's not about the green platform shoes, it's about the music. Adam, I'd love to hear, without wanting to sound too mean, Adam, I would love to hear about some of your negative experiences in music and how you tackled them at the time.
Oh, man. I mean, how many do we all have? There's all. If you've been playing music for long enough, it's not about how many times you made it, or it's not about if you ever made a mistake, it's how many times you did. Because that's the reality of this art. You will make a mistake if you put yourself out there, if you're performing and playing for people. It's going to happen. And I'm really happy we're talking about this because it can be so crushing to someone that's just coming along, trying something new. And I think it speaks broader to where our society is right now with social media, anonymous people just ripping each other apart. I mean, Twitter, it makes me sad when I go on Twitter sometimes because it's just like a black hole of despair at times. And in music specifically, we have Simon Cowell, American icon, and Simon Cowell is paid millions of dollars a year to just rip people apart. And I wonder, what does that do to our psyche as musicians when we're then listening to other people? And I had this wonderful teacher. I've talked about him on the show before, my trumpet teacher. And he gave us this poem, and we had to put it on our practice journal. And one line from it is, promise yourself to give so much time to the improvement of yourself that you have no time to criticize others. And that really stuck with me. It's like, if I'm going around and nitpicking other people's mistakes, the little things that they're doing wrong in their music, I mean, what can they say about me? But if I'm focused solely on what I'm trying to do, that's the better way to achieve your goals, to become the musician that you want to be. And one of the things I've really been focusing on as I get a little bit older and start to shift in my life is, this idea of mindset and maintaining this positive perception on life. And it's kind of funny because if you go to Amazon and you search for positive thinking, there'll be 10 million books about positive thinking because we have to teach it, right? But if you search for negative thinking, I mean, how many books? We already know how to do that. We know how to think bad about ourselves. We know how to criticize others. No one has to teach us how to do that. We know. And it kind of reminded me, because I want to leave you with something that you can start doing today. And it reminded me of a phrase, it's from the Bible. It says, that which we gaze upon, we become. And I think if we purposely put ourselves out there in a positive way, then that will reflect back upon us. And so what I try to do now, whether it's through music, whether it's in some of my business work or the other types of stuff I'm doing, if I'm asked for feedback on someone else's work, or if I'm working with someone, I try to purposely start by looking at the positive things that they're doing. And even if there's corrections that need to be made, if we try to frame it in a positive manner, it's like, look, this was great. Why don't you try to do it this way? Or it would sound really good if, as opposed to mean, Cal, that was terrible. You should just quit. That doesn't help anyone. And I think that if we just take the moment to become a cheerleader for others, to help realize not only that everyone faces this, but they can move on past these negative moments, these mistakes that they're going to make, that will in turn help us realize that we can move on as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that point about it impacting your confidence is a huge one. And also that it's a two-way street. The way you treat others has a huge impact on the way you respond when someone treats you similarly. It reminds me a lot of our Get Confident module at Musical U, where we have like a grab bag of techniques you can use to help develop your musical confidence. And one of the tips in there is to practice giving compliments, because we tend to be rubbish at receiving compliments as a musician. And so one of the other exercises is to practice receiving compliments well. But first, it's about just finding opportunities to go out and say nice things to people, whether in the world of music or elsewhere, because I think societally we are, as you say, very good at negative comments and not so good at the positive comments a lot of the time. And particularly when it can be under the guise of critique or, helpful feedback, when in reality for that person emotionally, it's just going to come like a ton of bricks.
And the great thing is, this is one of those non-musical skills that we sometimes talk about in Musical U. When you adopt this ideology, this positive mindset, it can have a great impact on every aspect of your life. At the time we're recording this, there's some things going on in my life, and I could look at this as I had plans and this ruined it, but instead, there are other people that are facing more difficult circumstances as a result of what's going on, and I'm still pretty lucky. And focus on what I can do, what I can control, as opposed to what I can't.
Yeah, and that was the other thing I really wanted to pick up on from what you said, was that focusing on the positive and trying to find the positive, because, you were talking about doing it with other people, before you critique, say something nice, but also, as you just said, it can come up in the sense of finding the silver lining in a situation. But it's come up several times on this show before in the context of recording yourself. Because one of the really painful things about using this amazing technique of recording your practice and listening back is, at first, none of us like the way we sound. And that goes double if you're singing and really listening to your voice. But probably the most helpful tip, apart from just do it, is when you do it, listen for something specific. Listen for something specific you're trying to improve and just focus in on, was that what it was meant to be? And of course, you can also take a moment to appreciate all of the things you did right. And that can transform what on the face of it would just be a very painful listening and being like, oh, I didn't sound amazing, into something that is both positive and constructive.
Yeah, I was just thinking with what Andrew said and Adam and what you said, the difference, I always think there's two different types of criticism. One is the destructive, which we've all had, versus in words and action. But the other one is constructive, which is the better. And, when I was younger, I still have a destructive tendency in my head to like nitpick myself, but I've gotten a whole heck of a lot better over time. And now, because my wife knows me, I'll like at the end of a show, I start like saying, I really need, that one part was bad. She's like, are you getting negative on yourself? I'm like, no. Because I also had some really good points, where I did this right or did that. I mean, we were talking about experiences. I grew up and I started playing in the metal scene in the 80s. And as Adam knows, the 80s was a metal shred fest. And I was not a shredder. I was more of a blues guy trying to do metal. Although I did the rhythms, I could do a lot of the rhythmical stuff real good. When it came to the leads, I was more of the bluesy guy. And because of that, certain things were said. And that sort of thing, but I had to just kind of wade through it. And I had a few people say, "Oh, I love shredders, but sometimes I like to hear some blues stuff that you do." But it has, over time, I've gotten better at listening through and going, "Okay, that was, that I could work on that. This is good," and that becomes a really good part of getting over some of that stuff that happened when we were kids.
Yeah, for sure, and. Yeah, I think we've touched on a few times here that it can be so personal. If you're doing music right, it is a personal thing, and it can be so bound up in your identity and your self-image and your confidence and your capabilities. For me, one of the standout painful moments in my musical past was when I was getting ready to audition for the chapel choir at my school. And up until then, I'd been a decent choir singer. I'd taken a few singing lessons, but I wasn't really pursuing singing. And anyway, so I went and took a couple of lessons with a teacher at my sister's school so that I could come back to my own school and audition. And anyway, we did a couple of lessons. It was fine. She was happy enough. I did my pieces. And then at the end of it, she was like, listen, I'm going to say something to you and feel free to hate me afterwards. But the way you say your S's is a bit weird. And your choir director might have a problem with that. So that's maybe just something to think about. And to give you the context, I was like, I think 10 or 11 at the time. So, my voice wasn't breaking. I wasn't dealing with that stuff, but a really painful age to be told something like that. And obviously I'd been aware. I'd had teasing, like kids at school saying I had a lisp and all of that. And, I hope it doesn't come across too much on this podcast. I think I said in the first episode, sorry if it does, because I do still say my S's weird and it's less bad than it was. But that singing teacher pointing this out to me and that being like that was my takeaway from those singing lessons. It wasn't, hey, you're prepped for this audition. Hey, you're a pretty good singer. It was, you're weird about the way you say your S's. And so I auditioned, I got into the choir. It was all fairly happy and plain sailing. But I was never a soloist in that choir. I was a good singer. I played my part. I was never asked to stand at the front and sing. And I'm confident that was at least in part because of this issue with the way I said my S's. And anyway, long story short, I gradually got better at it. I got to the point of doing a solo performance in a theatre production at school. And later in my 20s, I kind of grappled with this and was like, I should really fix this. And so I went to a speech and language therapist and she showed me, there was a different way to say my S's. And again, she wasn't delighted with the way it turned out. And I was satisfied. And, I now have a way of tackling this that let me feel comfortable starting a podcast. But, it's still an issue for me. It's still part of my identity as a singer, as a person. And I can trace it all back to that one bit of feedback, which was very well intentioned and very well put, but still really cut me deep and had an impact on who I was as a singer for the next 10 plus years. And I think I would just want to share that to make the point that it's not, negative things come along and you just have to deal with them and find the silver lining and everything's great after that. That's not what we're trying to say here today, I don't think. It really is more complex than that, whether you're a kid and it's, someone commenting on your voice breaking or, your first performance doesn't go well and someone notices, or you're an adult and you're carrying this baggage around with you and trying to be okay with that and trying to still feel confident and capable as a musician. And I think, if there's one thing I'm proudest of with this podcast and the 50 plus interviews we've done so far, it's that I think you could pick any single one of them and point to how that person's musical journey was not a smooth road. These people aren't coming on and saying, well, I was born with a trumpet in my hand and I played for the next 30 years and I was a world leading artist. There is always a twist or turn in there. And I hope that anyone listening, aside from the stories we've all shared today, I hope you've taken encouragement from those interviews every week that even the very best musicians have those negative experiences. We all handle it in our different ways. And sometimes there's a nice way to package it up and feel like you've made it constructive and move on. And sometimes it's something you're going to carry around with you and it's going to be a part of who you are as a musician, but it doesn't need to hold you back from reaching your goals. Before we wrap things up, any last minute thoughts or painful stories about platform shoes anyone would like to share?
The other thing I had to learn because of that is the whole topic of forgiveness. And it may seem like a small thing, but it's a pretty heavy thing. As I did some studying, because we tend to hold on to those things and they can direct us in so many different ways. But if we forgive, it's actually healthy for us. If we forgive some of those things that have happened to us from other people and let those go, it's an amazing thing. They say your blood pressure goes down, sicknesses start getting better. So it's amazing. And, I've seen my wife and I've seen people who hold on to things just completely self-destruct. And it's a sad thing to watch, but you can watch and it's like, just let go of this.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point. It's 100% within your control to decide whether to carry these things around with you in the future or not.
And also, sometimes things happen in our life. We don't really know why they happen at the time, Just a story from my past. I was a bugler in the United States Army Band, and I had to play in front of 25,000 troops and the sergeant major of the entire army, and I butchered it. It was one of the worst performances of my entire life. And the entire band was just sitting at me looking like, oh my gosh, and even the sergeant major was looking at me like, what the heck was that? And I what happened was I got a little bit arrogant in my playing, and I hadn't properly prepared, hadn't properly warmed up that morning, and it was like 6:30 in the morning I had to perform. Not the easiest time. 2 months later, I had to perform the same thing in front of President Obama. So a little bit of, but if I hadn't made that major mistake, I don't know if I would have prepared the way I did when I finally had to do it in front of the big boss. And I did do well in that performance, but like I said, sometimes these things happen, these mistakes happen, and if we choose to learn from them, apply the next level thinking to it and our preparation, it can lead to great things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that notion of taking something positive away, that idea of forgiving anyone you are carrying blame against, and also just, I think, the recognition that all of us as musicians are going to have these setbacks, these twists and turns, these painful moments. Those will go a long way. And I think the last thing I'd throw in there is just what we touched on early in this conversation, which is, Stuart called it the ledger living. That idea of a balance sheet, I think, is a useful one, because as we noted, one negative comment will outweigh 10 positive ones. And, that's a trite little observation in itself, but you can make use of it. You can actually act on that, which means storing up those positive comments, giving yourself some way to remember them, and making sure that when the negative one comes along, you remind yourself of all of those positive ones. I know when I first released an app on the App Store, and for the first time I was receiving public reviews of something I'd made, I really had to learn that lesson, because it hit me hard every time someone left a critical review, even if it was just 4-star instead of 5-star. Like, that was the one I remembered. And I learned that if I, kept a little printout of all of the positive ones, it was a lot easier to bounce back. And I think so, you can stock up on the good, so that it's a lot easier to keep your momentum and keep your stride when those little setbacks occur. And I don't want to end this episode by being totally self-serving, but I will just touch on one of our major themes at Musical U, which is community and support, because I think we'd be remiss if we talked as if you were all alone in this. Everything we've discussed is great stuff you can do in your own head to help with this. But the bottom line is, whether it's a teacher or a coach or a mentor, someone who you can look to and be like, oh, this went terrible, help, and can give you some good guidance, or a community of musicians, like-minded peers, friends and family, people who you can turn to and show a little bit of vulnerability and know that they're going to come back at you with positive feedback and reinforcement and encouragement. That is an enormous benefit for you in your musical life. Thanks so much, guys. It's been really fun to unpack this with you. I hope that everyone listening has enjoyed hearing us bear our painful musical moments. I'm sure we could all reel off several more. And as I said, the back catalogue of this podcast will provide plenty more raw fodder for any time you're sitting there thinking it's just me who isn't amazing at music, or it's just me who makes mistakes, or it's just me who gets stuck. Go back, listen to a few interviews, and I guarantee you will find yourself well corrected.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's musicalitypodcast.com.